I'm Wade Henderson. I'm president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the Leadership Conference Education Fund. I'm also the Joseph L. Rao Jr. Professor of Public Interest Law here at the University of the District of Columbia's David A. Clark School of Law. Well, I do, but yeah, that would be my view. But let me ground it in the history and substance of the court. First of all, one has to admire the founders of this republic because they recognized that a pure democracy, in the sense of one person, one vote, majority rules in every decision, does not respect the rights of the political and sometimes disfavored minority in our political system. So a representative government, as opposed to a pure democracy, I think was a stroke of genius. Secondly, the tripartite balance of power between the executive, the courts, and the legislature, I think also was a stroke of genius. And then thirdly, the court and the inherent values of the Constitution. This is an institution that could produce a decision like Dred Scott versus Sanford in the 1850s, which established the principle that in the political sphere, African Americans, or blacks as they were called, had no rights that a white person needed to respect. That's the basic premise. You then have a civil war. You have three Civil War-related amendments, and you have a period of progressive social change, which ended in 1877 with a political compromise between Democrats and Republicans that meant the Republican soldiers of the Civil War were withdrawn from the South, and a period of darkness, medieval darkness, descended on American democracy. You then get Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, which was the defining paradigm of the end of the 19th century. The same court, fast forward, it is the same court that brought you Brown versus the Board of Education, which overturned Plessy. It is the same court that upheld various significant advancements of rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution and applied it to the states in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It is a court that has done much to help transform America for the better. And yet it is not a static institution. And judicial appointments matter. And voting matters, because he or she who votes gets to determine the person who appoints judges to the federal bench, and that gets to determine the shape of our courts going forward. So the struggle that we have today, because of the decisions of Shelby County and related decisions, obviously reflect the political circumstances of the moment. But change is not born from one single event. And the history of progressive forces in this country, the history of the African American struggle, shows that we are a very resilient people, and that we bounce back and use difficulty as a way of helping to advance broader goals. An example, last year in 2012, the defining characteristic of the 2012 election was concern about voter suppression. That fear and the response to voter suppression among progressive forces, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, progressive labor forces, and others, helped to produce the largest turnout of African Americans at the polls ever recorded. It was a response to the potential adversity born from a voter suppression campaign. The objective now is to use the Shelby County decision as an example of what it really represents, which is an effort to hijack American democracy for a narrow slice of the political electorate. And we're not going to let that happen. Well, let me say that I think it would be wrong for us to deny the progress that has been made in America, in part as a result of the very movement we're discussing. So I think it would be incredibly wrong-headed for us to deny the benefits of change that have come to America. Quite the contrary, I am proud to celebrate those changes because I believe that the work that I and others who work with me have done helped bring that change about. Nothing would please me more than an accepted reality that race is no longer a factor in American life, and that this decision merely reflects the positive changes that have come to America. Now, let's be realistic. The elections of 2012 were replete with examples of efforts to block, suppress, manipulate, in other words, remove from the political process the votes of some Americans in contrast to others. Now, some may say, well, that's democracy at work. And yes, it is. There have always been examples of systematic steps to try to suppress the vote or influence the vote in various elections. That's not new. What is of concern is the magnitude of the suppression effort, the sophistication of the effort, the investment of resources in the effort, and the coordination of the effort in a way that was intended to have a more dramatic impact in the election outcome than we've ever seen before. That evidence was ignored in the analysis of the Chief Justice about the existence of voting discrimination in this country. Now, to have begun his analysis by suggesting that we acknowledge that there are problems in voting that still remain, but then to immediately to use that to pivot to how really positive the change has been, and thus justifies removing all support mechanisms, is, it seems to me, both cruel and manipulative, because the evidence is, of course, quite to the contrary. I think that Ed Bloom and others who have tried to use this decision, and rather really the circumstances of the moment, the Obama presidencies, to suggest that we are in a post-racial period of history, are simply wrong. And I don't think that one has to question their motives to analyze the results of the decision and the facts in the case. I think they're simply wrong, and I think you can choose lots of different areas to point out how truly wrong they are. I'll just give you one. This is the 40th anniversary of an important Supreme Court decision known as San Antonio versus Rodriguez. That decision, the Rodriguez decision, really was the one that established that a federal right to quality public education is not protected and not a guaranteed right under the Constitution, and in effect gave back to state courts the responsibility of determining whether there was financial equity in the public school systems. What that has meant is that we now have about 45 lawsuits in state courts that have challenged the way school funding formulas are developed by state legislatures. And it is a clear example of the failure to adequately fund resources that programs that would have a real impact in helping to change the quality of American life through educational opportunity. What we now have is a system since Brown that is fundamentally unequal and unfair. And our failure to address the lack of financial equity in how we fund schools and the programs that equal financial support would help buy continues to perpetuate the so-called achievement gap in performance between African Americans and Latinos and their white counterparts. And it also has helped to cement what is the closest thing to a caste system in American life, with blacks and Latinos in the lowest caste, largely defined by their lack of quality of public education. Those who ignore the problems of educational equity in American life are turning their backs on the kind of change that is necessary to achieve the post-racial society that they purport to desire. No, I mean, you're right. Look, our criminal justice system is, again, replete with examples of unfairness, not intentionally motivated, but are the results of structural inequality and biases that affect how laws are developed. Just take the difference in the disparity in sentencing between crack and powder cocaine users, which largely break down along sort of racial and cultural lines, with powder cocaine being favored by the sort of white middle class drug user and crack cocaine being preferred by young African American Latino street guys. The sentencing that resulted from the use of those two drugs had a profound impact in helping to grow America's prison system. So the 1985 decisions to sentence crack cocaine users at 100-to-1 disparity over powder cocaine users under the premise that crack was a more dangerous drug, even though pharmacologically they are almost the same, has resulted in a kind of disparate impact in sentencing that has been outrageous and has sucked up enormous numbers of young black and Latino men who are taken out of society at the very time they should be forming healthy social relationships to advance their interests. Indirectly, that has helped to create a real distortion in American life, and it requires an aggressive effort to overcome it. I'm pleased that the Leadership Conference worked on a bill known as the Fair Sentencing Act that really helped to transform and reduce, rather, the penalty between crack and cocaine users, and has resulted in a far smaller number of people being incarcerated since the bill was passed in 2010. Those kinds of changes, though, reflect the need for reform, because structural inequality and residual discrimination, when combined with an unwillingness to find common ground in a bipartisan way, has really resulted in significant hardships across areas as diverse as voting, economic development, and criminal justice. And that's why the priorities of the Leadership Conference that I've mentioned in part reflect those difficulties and challenges.